Did a real person named Jesus of Nazareth actually live, die on the cross, and rise from the dead? That's what we've been talking about in this mini-series. We've been talking about a case, C.A.S.E, for the resurrection, and looking at historical evidence to point to, did Jesus rise from the dead, or is it some myth that we can discard and not believe? And so far we've looked at the crucifixion, appearances, skeptics converted, and so if you haven't seen those already, check those links out below. But today we're going to look at the empty tomb. And so with the first three, the crucifixion, the appearances, the skeptics converted, the incredible vast majority of scholars, not just Christian, but atheists, agree that all three of those things happened. It's near unanimous for those. That Jesus really died on the cross, that the disciples really believed that they saw Jesus, and that these skeptics converted to Christianity. And so when it comes to the empty tomb, this isn't quite as unanimous. It's still a majority of scholars, though, Christian and atheists, believe that the tomb was actually empty where Jesus was buried. And the reason we can believe that is from the very beginning of Christianity, Jews and Romans wanted to eliminate it and wipe it out. The Jews thought it was blasphemous and was taking away from Judaism, and the Romans wanted to get rid of it because they didn't like people worshiping someone other than Caesar. And the Christians were saying Jesus is Lord and God instead of Caesar is Lord and God. And so they all wanted to get rid of Christianity. So the question then is, if Christianity is growing and spreading because people are claiming they saw Jesus back from the dead, they are claiming that Jesus rose from the dead. If that is the claim, then all the Jews or Romans had to do was produce the body of Jesus. All they had to do was go to the tomb, roll the stone away, and get out Jesus' body, and that's the end of Christianity. And they knew where the tomb was. It was Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. Everyone knew where to go to look for the body of Jesus, yet it wasn't there. And so the question is, why couldn't the Jews or the Romans produce the body of Jesus when they really wanted to? It's because Jesus rose from the dead. There was no body in the tomb because the body was no longer dead and Jesus was back from the dead. And so that is something, another piece of evidence that the body was not able to be produced by the Romans or the Jews. That's a piece of evidence that Jesus actually rose from the dead. And so when we look at this argument, when we look at the case for the historicity, the real bodily resurrection of Jesus, when we look at the overall case of it, the thing that makes the most sense to me is that Jesus actually rose from the dead. The main theories that we see is that Jesus rose from the dead, or the disciples hallucinated and thought they saw Jesus, or the disciples stole the body. Those are the three main hypotheses that really exist after looking at the evidence. Because the fact that it's a myth, that's not really a possibility. Because we know that Jesus was a real person. It wasn't this myth created hundreds of years later. It was immediate teaching about Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. So it's not a myth formed later. And so we're left with actual resurrection, hallucinations, and stealing of the body. And based on the evidence, the only one that accounts for all of the evidence well is the resurrection of Jesus. Now you might say, but that's impossible. Yes, it is. People don't just rise from the dead. That is an impossibility in our human existence, right? We die and we stay dead. That being said, the other options are also impossible. Mass hallucinations, we already covered this. They don't exist. There's no documented existence of mass hallucinations. Science has no proof for mass hallucinations of multiple people seeing the same hallucination. And so to say that there was this mass hallucination of Jesus is a scientific impossibility. And then you consider that happened 3 times, that Jesus appeared to the masses 3 separate times. You're talking about something that's impossible happening 3 times. That's incredibly unlikely and impossible. And so hallucinations are just as impossible as a resurrection because there's no scientific backing for it. And then stealing the body is impossible for 2 reasons. One, we already talked about this, but how would a bunch of untrained fishermen with limited weapons be able to overthrow trained Roman guards who were specifically stationed at the tomb to prevent Jesus' body from being stolen? it wouldn't happen. These untrained, fearful fishermen who last we see them at Jesus' death are running and scattered and afraid would not have been able to coordinate and execute an attack to steal Jesus' body. Couldn't have happened. And then even if they had, the other impossibility is human nature. Human nature makes it impossible for that to have happened, because what happened to all of those disciples who supposedly may have stole the body? One, if they stole the body, they would have known they would have stole the body, yet all of them were willing to suffer and die for the claim that they saw Jesus rose from the dead. And I think it's impossible to find a group of human beings who know something happened. If they knew it, they would have known that they stole it, to die for a known lie. You can find one or two weirdos who might do that, but you're not going to find a group of people willing to suffer for years and years and years before finally being put to death for that claim. That doesn't happen. We as humans like comfort and security, and it's not like they got money and wealth for this lie. No, they got poverty and punishment and persecution and death. And so we're left with three impossibilities: a true resurrection, hallucinations, or people willing to die for a lie. And the one that accounts for the evidence best is the resurrection of Jesus. And here's the other reason that I think it makes the most sense. If God doesn't exist, then none of the three of them make sense. They're all impossible. If God does exist, then the hallucination theory still doesn't make sense, and the stealing of the body doesn't make sense. But if God does exist, then the resurrection makes perfect sense. Because the Bible tells the story of a God of love and compassion who came down to this earth in the person of Jesus, was willing to suffer and die so that your sins and my sins could be forgiven. And on top of that, the story of the Bible offers life after death. And so the resurrection of Jesus is that first example and the first victory over death that now is offered to his believers and to his followers. And so the resurrection makes perfect sense if God does exist. But the other theories don't make sense if God does exist or if he doesn't exist. And so when looking at the historical evidence that we have, putting on my rational mind and thinking clearly and thoughtfully about the issue of Jesus' resurrection, I can walk away from this very confident and excited that the evidence points to a true, historical, bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. And that's worth being excited over.